Okay, so thank you guys so much. We are going to shift to I am anticipating interesting conversation about our shelter system. So throughout the day, we're going to have a little blip here and there about all these different components of our homeless service provider system. And today, I'm incredibly honored to be joined by 4 folks who do a lot of really deep work in and around our shelter space. You'll hear from some of them. They also do a lot of work in other places. One of the things that you'll notice in Lane County and with a lot of our providers is very rarely do they ever just do one thing. We have highly integrated systems and nonprofits throughout the community who are actually working in a lot of spaces. So we'll touch on a little bit of that, but mostly focused on shelter here this morning. So I'm going to give each of them an opportunity to introduce themselves and a brief overview of the organization you represent before we dive into questions.
My name is Gabe. It's a pleasure to be here with all you awesome humans, and I'm excited to share a little bit about what's happening at Everyone Village. Out in yonder West Eugene, not too far from here, not too long ago, we started an experimental kind of shelter reality, really leaning heavily into private business partnership. And so 4 Acres started the story as a donation from the Rexius company and family, and we've been hot guns a-blazing since. We now have over 60 tiny homes at Everyone Village where folks are being sheltered from the streets. We have innovative programming, and we have 3,500 square foot resource community center where we're really intentional on bringing walls down between neighborhoods, communities, and folks living in transitional shelter sites. Because what was said earlier is absolutely true. You can have a hot dog and play a good game of cornhole with someone, even if they live in a transitional shelter site, believe it or not. So one of the things that we have going there, which is really exciting, just to share as a highlight, is through our Welcome Center and Resource Center, have a workshop. We're a partnership with Constructing a Brighter Future, and there's an article on that in your magazine on your table, where folks that live at Everyone Village are helping to build shelters to help themselves and others and learn job skills along the way. We also have the state's only alternative redemption recycling program at Everyone Village in partnership with the Oregon Beverage and Recycling Cooperative, where we are affording transitional employment opportunities for folks that live at Everyone Village so that they can get that piece of their lives on charged up and ready to go as they seek out flourishing and shelter and healing. And all of this at Everyone Village we do in a relational model, which brings into a sweet balance support, encouragement, friendship, leadership, and accountability so that folks can actually get from point A to point B, which is from unsheltered to flourishing and giving back to the community that's giving to them now. Thank you.
Thanks, Gabe. I'm going to toss it to Cheryl next, and then I'll wrap up with you, Peter. I'll let Cheryl go, and then I'll wrap up with you.
Right. Good morning, everyone. I'm Cheryl Balthrop from the Eugene Mission, and want to applaud the great work of Gabe and Everyone Village. Eugene Mission, everyone thinks they know who we are, but we have changed over the last 6 decades. We are not, as Echo Northwest mentioned, a place of last resort. We are a place of flourishing. We are connecting our guests with the community and restoring them to healthy community. We have a vibrant campus where guests are connecting with life skills in the community. We are bringing the community to the Eugene Mission. Groups are meeting there, or sharing meals with our guests, or mentoring our guests. We have life skills and a variety of opportunities for our guests to rebuild their lives so that they're restored to their families, to their vocations, to lives of meaning. We're hoping that our guests can be restored to independence. We're looking for our community to recognize our guests as precious, wonderful individuals with so much to provide to our community. And back to the community, that our guests should not be someone that we're just looking at to put somewhere, but again, to provide that full integration. We have a relational model. We're not looking to just provide materials and resources, though we do that. We provide hundreds of thousands of meals each day. Each month, let me correct myself. We're serving hundreds of individuals, but where our real impact is relational. We know each of our guests by name, we know where their hurts are, and we're rebuilding their lives so this terrible cycle of homelessness is broken. We don't want to be part of the process where people are doing this rinse and repeat and going back out on the street. We want to get them back to their families and back to the life of meaning. Thanks.
Thank you, Cheryl. Michelle?
I had to write it all down here. I'm Michelle Hankus. I work with Shelter Care. We've been around for over 50 years, and our services have changed over the 50 years as our community has changed. I'm kind of the outlier here. We do not do shelter. Yes, we're called shelter care. It's a misnomer. We're really looking at our services in that housing continuum that you heard Kate talk about, that you heard other people talk about, include prevention, all the way to getting people into their own units with their own leases. Perhaps it's through affordable housing, and everything in between, except for that emergency shelter site, which is so important. So we do prevention services, a lot of that money, that rent assistance. We do transitional or short-term housing where people learn skills so they're successful. We partner with a lot of other agencies who may be doing the case management. We may be doing the case management because we know that people, when they get those skills, like that Cheryl is talking about, are going to be more successful when they get to that continuum of permanency, whether that is permanently supported housing, because shelter care works with the folks that no one else wants to work with, to be really, really blunt. We work with the people with severe mental illness, physical disability, and other huge vulnerabilities that make case management throughout their lives necessary. But we also provide affordable housing in some of our units as well that are voucher systems. And to keep people stable, we have a very small but mighty behavioral health program that, again, is focused on individuals with severe persistent mental illness that have a housing or have been unhoused. If you have been chronically unhoused, it's sort of a chicken and the egg. Do you become unhoused because you have a mental illness, or do you develop trauma because you've been unhoused? Doesn't matter. You're going to need help. And so we have those services that go all the way through, and we're really focused on that recidivism rate. Again, we work with also the county court systems to identify individuals who, why are we paying them to be in jail when we can maybe support them in ways to get them back on their feet and break that cycle. I will stop there because I could talk all day.
Excellent. Plot twist. We included Michelle as a myth buster, but also to talk about the other components of the system, so thank you. All right, Peter, we'll toss it to you, and my hope is that you can share a little bit more broadly about kind of the state of our shelter system, some of the information that you have from your position in the City of Eugene.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name's Peter Chavan. I'm the Homeless Services Manager for the City of Eugene. What that has meant historically is engaging with our partners at the county to think at the strategic level around interventions into homelessness. And then more recently, the city has really leaned into the sheltering component of our current situation. And this largely came about, I think probably the first moment was in 2013 out of the Occupy movement, where some of the alternative shelters first came into being. And then more recently with the COVID pandemic, where the city set up, I think, 475 alternative shelter beds. And so in terms of our current situation, and I'm really familiar with the city's program, so if I make any errors, I'll hope that our partners at the county can correct me. But kind of broad strokes, we have about 1,280 shelter beds in Lane County. Of those 1,280, I think about 1,170 are in Eugene. Currently, 60% of those are emergency shelters, or as of August, we're in a dynamic moment with all-in money as alternative shelters are transitioning to emergency shelters. But as of August of 2023, about 700 of the 1,200 were emergency shelters, about 450 were alternative shelters. The difference there being the HUD definitions that Kate alluded to earlier, and largely that's related to electricity and heat in the living structures and non-congregate settings. And if you think back to the numbers provided by Eco Northwest, if we have 4,100 folks unhoused in Lane County and 1,200 shelter beds, that kind of gives you an idea of why you're seeing what you're seeing out on the street. So we're in a lot better place today than we were when I started. So I've been doing this work for about 4 years now, and in that time, despite decreases at some of our larger congregate shelters like the Mitchin or Dusk to Dawn, the expansion of alternative shelters, the rest stop programs, the safe sleep sites, has netted 300 additional beds in the last 4 or 5 years. So the bulk of that funding, as you saw in the Eco Northwest presentation, is one-time federal dollars. There's one thing that COVID did do for our community. It allowed us to expand our shelter beds over the last 3 to 4 years. But the bulk of those dollars are one-time dollars. The all-in funding hints at stabilizing a portion of those dollars for shelter, but the bulk of our spending on shelter is one time. I did want to make one correction or clarification from the Eco Northwest presentation. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the community safety payroll tax. That fund is the city's primary source of ongoing funding for shelter. And so when we think about ongoing funding within the City of Eugene's programs, we rely heavily on the community safety payroll tax to help with that. So I think I'll leave it there we can continue.
Yeah, and thanks for clarifying that, Peter, because I noticed that as well. And just to step that clarification up, so you guys familiar with the public safety payroll tax, and you know that amount is much more than $1 to $3 million, which was shown. That was just the portion of that payroll tax that is dedicated to homeless service funding. So you all know a large portion of that goes to our public safety system, and it kind of goes across several different pieces of that. But specifically, the homeless service funding for the city is coming out of that portion of the tax. Thanks, Peter. Okay, let's start on a high note. Can you guys each share with me what's going well? Where are some areas that your organizations are seeing some light, feeling some optimism, maybe have some opportunities that you think are worth sharing with the community?
There's a lot to be happy about and excited about. So despite some of the stark numbers we're seeing and learning together this morning, I hope that we can all get to a point here soon where we're really excited and charged about what we have in front of us and that we are going to accomplish it. A couple of things that are exciting in the service space is there's a kind of a new energy around collaboration and letting down of pride and really coming together strategically and cohesively. All In certainly supports and facilitates that, but it started happening before All In, which is just a natural reflection, I think, of our area. We do have a pioneer spirit in our region, and Eugene as a city and Springfield as a community and cities, we have an innovative way of doing things, and we're well known for that. So much excitement around the City of Eugene Homeless Services team and All In Lane County and the Chamber convening and bringing together and synergizing collective efforts. And that's being felt at the shelter level by the folks that are being served. So they are starting to see, hey, this is a big community effort, and maybe the time for just receiving services is over, and maybe I've got a part to play too. So many of the folks that receive services at Everyone Village are so excited to hear about what's happening in spaces like this. It motivates them and excites them and gives them belief that they're valued, that they belong, and that they can actually be part of the solution the whole community is lifting together. So pretty exciting stuff. If you want winsome tales and you want to see it in person, please come to Everyone Village. We'll show you all about it.
And I would like to share that so often we hear about the open-air drug markets and the struggling people out on the streets. The Eugene Mission, we don't take any government funds, but we have a very robust recovery program. We have people coming to our doors who are desperately seeking recovery. There are folks, so many folks out there that are seeking to find a way out of the addiction and the substance use that they're experiencing, the broken coping mechanisms out on the street. And we are having wonderful, wonderful results. And it's a no-cost, one-year program for men and women. And again, I'd encourage you to get the word out that there is a way forward for individuals without any resources, intensive, residential, very effective, supportive, and loving environment to help folks move forward and be restored.
I have I have a list, but I'll give you only two because they mentioned some of them. One is, it's soon going to be rolled out, and it's an updated process for collaborative front door assessment and agencies. It's so complicated. I'm trying to find the right words, and you might be able to do it better for me. But it's really looking at how to get people into services at the service level they need faster and more efficiently. And again, I don't want to explain it too well because I won't do it justice. But the other thing is an increased conversation recognizing that housing is a form of healthcare. And I'm sitting right here in front of Peace Health, and I think I've spent a lot of time, quality time with y'all lately, really looking at recognizing that it's really challenging sometimes to define healthcare away from the social service sector and housing, and that so many people come to the emergency room and housing might be key in there, and if we can somehow work together. But the ongoing conversation, really appreciate that.
Check, check. All right. So I work for the city, and I work in homeless services, and I see all of this stuff all the time. And I also see emails to city council or to the city manager complaining, demanding that the city respond. And so we're kind of in this roiling foment around homelessness. And it's hard to see an exit strategy. I think this is part of it. And my graduate work was on social movements. And one of the things that I noticed across, I think, every social movement that I studied was that those social movements in popular culture, in popular consciousness, had a beginning moment. But the work was happening well before people recognized the social movement was underway. And there were little pieces of activity in disparate places. And there was a catalyzing event that transformed a community into that social movement. And so for me, the most hopeful thing is the conversation like this, the collaboration that has intensified with All In funding, the conversations I have with people that demonstrate they have an increasingly sophisticated understanding of the problem. And so for me, what's exciting is that those little disparate moments are starting to intensify. I don't know when the transformation is going to come, but I think if we keep holding space for these kinds of connections, we'll find it. So that's my answer.
Thanks, Peter. I appreciate that. Yeah. Cheers to that. Okay, let's dive in a little bit to the challenges. I know each of you face them every single day. So let's pick them apart. Anybody can start. What are some of the challenges that you're facing? If you have, a shared vision for how the business community can help support that challenge, or just in general, how collaboration is making it a little bit easier. But I'm just curious, what's keeping you up at night?
Oh boy. I'm going to say burnout. And when I say burnout, it's not just my staff. My staff are exhausted. They are utterly, completely exhausted. Not only do they have some of the hardest work in the community, but then they hear so many of the community disparage what they're doing. And that's exhausting to hear. But also, I'm worried about all of you and your fatigue, my donor fatigue, that, my goodness, we keep doing this over and over again. We're on a treadmill. I'm worried about that treadmill, because it's not really a treadmill. What it really is that it's one of those things where you're running and its incline is going up and up and up. So you're doing so much more work because things are growing and growing and growing. So it's not a treadmill. They just keep moving the bar. So I'm really worried about that. And what really scares me is one-time money. You heard about it today. You look at those graphs. We at Shelter Care, when these one-time grants came out, we were very strategic in choosing what we would do, recognizing that one-time money, if you hire and train and bring people up and then the money's gone, what have we done? We've maybe created a bigger problem than what we had before. So we were very, very careful. But there's a lot of one-time money that our partners are using, that our community is using, that keeps me up at night.
For me, it would have to be untreated mental illness, because the resources that are needed for that are substantial, and I'm seeing less and less resources being available and fewer individuals there to assist individuals. And with all due respect and the but for and but and et cetera, housing is not going to address if someone is traumatized or deeply depressed. In fact, putting them somewhere where they will be isolated might increase their risks. And I am deeply concerned that we are continuing to push our seniors, our teens, our compromised individuals out and away from caring and loving relationships. And we at the Mission, we're not medical or mental health professionals. We are working as hard as we can to identify healthy family members, to reconnect individuals, to see if we can connect people with their children, et cetera, so they don't slide further into depression, et cetera, where we see terrible, terrible declines in overall health and ability to maintain community connections.
Yeah, thanks, Joe.
All right, time to get real. So the challenges that we're experiencing in Everyone Village are going to require your help to overcome. And you're doing it right now. So when I go back after this to the village and share what happened in this room and what was said and who was here, that buoys the staff. That helps to push back a little bit on staff fatigue because they know they're not alone in the fight. There's people behind them while they're on the front lines thinking and talking and speaking and investing into the solutions that we have as a community. So one of the challenges is we need sustainable big-time funding, and that's going to be government-based. Yes? Yes. So the problem, though, is so big and gnarly. In order to respond well and get the edge on it, we have to be nimble and able to pivot and adapt quickly. That doesn't marry very well with big government funding movements. So privatized business leaders and internal geniuses of Lane County, we need you to step into the shelter space and into the response space and help with your thoughts, your ideas, your experiences, your acumen, your creativity and innovation, and then we'll find winsome creative ways to sew the two together so that we have the perfect dual-headed response of sustainable funding from the government, that's part of their role, and then private business innovation and creativity helping to unlock sticky wickets, of which we have plenty.
Thanks, Peter. You want to add anything there?
Not a ton substantively. I think it was covered here. For me, homelessness, we're talking about our community, right? And there's this, I think, false split between service provision, shelter provision on the one hand, kind of the compassion side, and the accountability piece, right? And all of that happens within the context of relationships. And so for me, the challenge is how do folks who are not in relationship with homelessness or the unhoused enter into that? Similarly, how do folks who don't have housing enter into relationships with people who do? Because that way we deepen our real understanding of one another and the opportunities for innovation multiply. So that's all I would add.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Okay, we have a few more questions, but I think I'm going to pause for the moment from these scripted questions and take a minute to open it up to the audience. There's folks who have a question for one or multiples of the panelists. Please jump up and down. If not, we'll keep going. Yeah, Jen.
What's the best way, I just see in various Facebook groups, on the ground, people maybe are entering homelessness and they're just like, I've tried all these resources, where do I go? And as someone who I helped my brother get out of homelessness, I don't even know how to navigate the resources. And so how do you help someone who's especially vulnerable, having other issues, get their foot in the door, figure out which organization, where to start? Is there somewhere if we see this, hear this in the community, how can we help refer them to the right places to get help?
Repeat the question.
Yeah, thank you. So Jen was asking kind of about points of entry for folks in the community. So if you as a community member have someone who's vulnerable or experiencing a situation yourself, how do you enter into the system, find the right organization to interact with, or kind of get your foot in the door in our homeless service system?
I'll take a first shot at that. I think probably the best route, and I know our partners at Lane County are working really hard on this, but there is a 211 telephone number. You can also go to Lane County's webpage, and they will help navigate. The City of Eugene has a webpage, Homeless Services, that links to the county's webpage. That's probably the most comprehensive resource to get started. Otherwise, you're connecting with Cheryl's organization and seeing how that goes, and then you're going to Gabe's, and that can get super frustrating. So the most centralized information, 211, Lane County, City of Eugene, we have a broad resource list.
Yeah, and I would say the conversations, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that we were having with a lot of the social service providers is that the size and scope of our homeless population grew so quickly that our systems that we did or didn't have in place to support it were inadequate. And when you saw some of the funding dollars in the Eco Northwest study talking about administration, really what they're talking about is that system level support for the shelter. So we're talking about navigation. We're talking about a coordinated entry system where we're actually, we're working across organizations to make sure the most vulnerable folks are getting access to the resources that we have here. But those systems weren't in place. They had to be created over the last several years, and they've been improved dramatically, I would say, over the last few, but there's a lot of room. I think that's one of the spaces that, serving on the Poverty and Homelessness Board, our lived experience committee talks a lot about the shortfalls we have in the entering into the system. So I appreciate it's a challenge, and I think it's one that folks have identified that we need to work on. Yeah.
So one of the groups in particular is the Eugene Springfield Resources. A lot of people in there talking about trying to get resources, and I would just encourage people who aren't looking for resources but can maybe help direct them to join that group so that other people are helping these people that are like, I'm about to become homeless. What do I do? Where do I go? I've made all these phone calls. What do I
Yeah,
do
it's great.
next? And encouraging other people who can maybe help answer some of those questions, be in those groups, even if they're not themselves looking for resources.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Thanks, Jen. Yeah, Bob.
In the Eco Northwest presentation and in our conversations, we've identified the single greatest source of funding comes from that federal level, right? And it's passed through state. So what can we as a chamber, and what can we as a community do to move the needle or the conversation at the federal level where the greatest opportunity is for us to make a difference? So how do we move and work together as a community to change that federal conversation when we're on the brink of not passing the budget?
Thanks, Bob. His question is, how can we move the needle on the federal level, knowing that's where the bulk of our funding comes from as a community? I'll let any of you guys chime in.
Non-traditional answer, because I don't know anything about how you do that officially. But what I do know is, while these bigger sweeping macro movements are happening that are orchestrated and funded largely at the federal level, we do need the wisdom to be in that space and coming back and forth between our little community on the West Coast and that big institution. But I think there's a lot of power and value in us coming together, like I said, as a pioneer-based region with an innovative and creative spirit, and let's do what we can on the ground in small ways, use what we're being given from the federal level, pull our other existing resources locally together, and get some wins on the table, because probably what could happen out of that, I would guess, is if we start doing it on our own, it's only a matter of time before those bigger movements take notice and say things such as, or ponder things such as, boy, we want to put our investment where it matters, where things are happening, where successes are being achieved, and new systems are being created. So I think we have a lot of power in our own hands to catch the attention and use our winsome history as Lane County, as an innovative county in the Northwest, to make a mark, make a stamp, and have people paying attention.
I'd like to piggyback on that. So this is one of my great concerns, having been in this community for 30 plus years. I started professionally and saw this wide array of amazingly creative nonprofits serving a wide variety, from seniors to youth to teen challenges, parenting skills, you bet it, the whole thing. And now, more recently, particularly in the unhoused community, we see everything moving towards a very much a one-size-fits-all orthodoxy, because we're chasing those HUD definitions. I understand, and I think we're pretty much all in agreement that it's a very complex issue requiring a variety of responses. But sadly, we're seeing so much of that creativity and compassionate, broad response of this community all turn to where the nonprofits are all running after that one definition. And if we can do anything as a business community, is to retain that innovation, retain that broad response, retain those creative approaches, even though those may not be the HUD definitions. I'd encourage us to do that, because that's how we're going to get the most effective responses to this problem and not go down the same route that other communities have.
Yeah, thanks, Cheryl.
And to piggyback again on that, you heard earlier in somebody's presentation that federal dollars are not, they're very prescribed. Ye shall do X, Y, Z, just as Cheryl pointed out as well. And so innovation and federal dollars do not necessarily go hand in hand. That is not to say, following Gabe's point, is that over time, it can change when they see models change. And I'm looking at, from anything from a Medicaid process, which is very prescribed, but maybe not in a way that's useful to our clients. Doesn't mean that Medicaid is bad. It's that that is the model we have to use. Things can change when we prove that that change works. It's, again, back to that chicken and the egg.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes, and. We know that this is a problem up and down the West Coast and in the Northeast, right? Big problem. The chamber, I'm assuming, is connected to chambers of commerce in those areas. And so collaborating, developing a chamber coalition to advocate at the federal level would be helpful. I'm sure many of you are connected to our local congressional delegation. Speaking to those folks where you recognize or beat that drum where cities, counties need help, that would be another area where this group could help. And so, again, we don't need one, it's not either federal dollars, federal best practices, one type of program, or quirky Eugene flavored programs, right? Because actually neither of those are going to answer the whole question. And so both of those, I think, are useful.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I feel like this is one of those opportunities to turn a coal into a diamond, and that is, we have for a long time borne this patch of one of the highest homeless populations per capita in the country, right? In my opinion, then people should listen to us, right? We should have a stronger voice at the state and at the federal level, because we have so much deep experience with this challenge. But the way that we do that is by getting all of our voices on the same page. And I think that's the opportunity we have, is to understand where are the areas at the federal government that we all agree we can push on, and then try to reach out. We've already kind of started this conversation at the national level with chambers across the country, who frankly, after seeing the Eugene Chamber jump into this space, we've had a lot of chambers reaching out saying, this is a big problem in my community. I don't know how to dive in, but if you guys can give us any tips, we'd love to. And sharing that information and building that national coalition is something that we're really passionate about and focused on, because we do think that there's going to be a lot more movement if you bring the business community together with government and social services at the federal level as well to try to push some of that change. Thanks, Bob. Yeah.
I'd like to piggyback on Gabe's comment. Isn't there like a really incredible model in Austin, Texas, and maybe you could share with the audience why they are this kind of shiny, comprehensive picture that might get attention?
Community First Village in Austin, Texas, which was born out of Mobile Loaves and Fishes, an innovative street outreach of a food truck with the service on the same side as the receiver of the food, and now it's a ginormous program. What I do know about it is full of innovation. It is an all-encompassing reality where the Community First Village mirrors the larger community it's a part of, and that it's got it all. Good celebrations, good services, work, recreation, housing, all that good stuff. They are set up to receive Section 8 vouchers for a lot of the folks that they serve. And I don't know that there's a model for that here right now, but one thing we could conceive of as an innovative business community is, what does it look like over the next 5 years to 10 years while we have these bigger macro movements happening to find little patchwork pieces of ground around our community where we can start setting up small, easy to get going villages, micro villages of folks with HUD-approved tiny homes that can receive Section 8 vouchers, which then makes that a sustainable model. And again, it's just this patchwork growth underneath the bigger movements, to Peter's wisdom of, we need it all, obviously. You saw the numbers, I saw the numbers, we need it all at the table. So there's a couple things I think we can do, like Community First Village in Austin, to help improve our local situation.
Excellent. So I'm going to give us an opportunity to answer another question here. If we have time, we'll jump back out to the audience. But I don't want to miss the question. What do you think are the biggest opportunities or ways that the business community can support our shelter system from a system-wide perspective or kind of individually within your organizations?
I'm not afraid to ask for help. And we need it, boy howdy. It's a big sticky wicket, obviously. So here's where we need help. We need big, big energy. It's a big, big problem. It has its own big, big energy, as we know, and it's moving fast and it's growing. So we need to match and exceed that, which means we need y'all to step down into these various spaces, prevention, sheltering, all that good stuff that was talked about earlier and you're going to hear about throughout the rest of today. And just start investing, making the connections. To everyone's wisdom up here, start with the relational piece first. It's so easy to say, hey, my name is Gabe, nice to meet you. You can affirm humanity without condoning behavior all day long. So start making the connections with those that are experiencing homelessness around your sphere of life. Start connecting with a local provider or prevention or shelter care, whoever's kind of meeting your fancy inside, where you kind of get charged up when you hear about it. And start toeing in and seeing what magic can happen. I don't know how else to explain it, but you can get the problem up on its heels if you come at it with unexpected maneuvers. And there's not much more unexpected than the logger guy, Rexius bark mulch guy, and chamber folks coming together with a bunch of awesome folks and the city homeless services team and creating a way for folks to get help. So more of that.
My request for you all is to please keep your business hats on. Look at what we're doing. Is it effective? When folks enter a program, are they getting better or are they getting worse? I mean, each of us need to hold ourselves accountable for our actions. Are we helping people or are we entrapping them in a very difficult situation? These are hard questions. We've asked ourselves that at the Eugene Mission, and we made revisions to what we're doing. And we are tracking the health of our guests across the whole spectrum. Are they getting better with their mental health, their physical health, their vocational, spiritual, etc.? If we're not doing that, we do not deserve the community's support. We are doing that, and I would ask you to come and take a look at what we're doing, because I think it'll be an encouragement to you that it is not an expensive endeavor financially, but it's a very expensive endeavor for our relational piece, our time piece, and our heart piece. And I guarantee you, when you start to get to know the guests that are doing this courageous work of rebuilding their lives, you are going to get caught up in this, but it is going to give you hope that we can change this trajectory, and we will. But we need to get one-on-one with individuals and stop tossing sandwiches out the window.
Okay, thank you. Yes, say it. I have 3 asks. One is from Shelter Care. One of our programs is a master lease program, and it's kind of a subletting program where you lease with Shelter Care, and we do a sublease with some of our clients who are really, really hard to place. And what happens is we're doing all of the property management. We do the notices. We do evict. That doesn't mean they're out of the program. It just means they messed up and they have to start over again and be held accountable. But we need partners, so if you are a landlord willing to work with us, come see me. That's number 1 ask. Number 2 ask is for not only Shelter Care, but my fellow partner agencies. COVID did not do volunteerism a favor. It really killed off a lot of volunteerism opportunities for safety, for really good reasons. We need to rebuild our volunteer base. We need to re-engage our Gen Zs. So if you have any Gen Zs or whatever is after Gen Z, I'm not even sure, to get them back into volunteering, or if you're a retiree or knowing someone, we need to rebuild our volunteer base. I see volunteers in medicine is here. I see so many people out here. We need to help our fatigued staff members. The third ask is from those who are unhoused, and is an ask that you be careful of your assumptions. And, okay, here's an example. You don't need to raise your hand, because I'm not going to out anybody on a HIPAA basis here. If you have diabetes, or if you know someone with diabetes, then you know when someone is having a diabetes situation, their behaviors can become erratic. If you're unhoused and you haven't had food for a while, and our unhoused population is aging, and we are seeing a lot of health issues, especially diabetes. So if you see someone lurching down the street, and you go, oh, they're drunk, or a drug user, are they really? Or are they someone who has not had any nutrition and is having a diabetic attack? I see someone snapping for me, thank you. Another thing is we work with a lot of people with mental illness. And I was sitting with one of them, chatting with his story, and he is absolutely anti-drug. Anti-drug. But if you saw him before he came to shelter care, you would have thought this is a person who is definitely on drugs. His problem is that he's not on drugs. The problem is that he has prescriptions that he needs to survive, but doesn't have access to the medical care. So just think about it. When you see someone in distress, don't make your assumptions. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. All right, Peter, you've been good at this all day. Bring us home. No pressure.
You know, I think all of the answers up here are, it's hard to go wrong if you lean in, right? If you develop relationships with shelters or people who are unhoused or any part of the system, you're being helpful. You know, I talk with my staff. We get requests constantly from the public, from our bosses, from the council. Why? And sometimes that's inconvenient. And it helps us hone our answers. And so one of the most important things I think we can do as a community is ask why we're doing the things that we're doing. So Cheryl has a model that works very well for the population that she serves, but it doesn't work for everybody. Gabe has a different model, and they may have different policies and procedures, but it would be helpful to know, well, why, Gabe? Why do you do things that way? It's a multifaceted problem. It's multifacets to the solution, and the deeper we understand it, the more constructively we can engage with it, and I'll keep going back to relationships. If you want to help, get in touch with somebody that you respect and trust and say, okay, what do you need? This is what I can do. I think if we move forward in that spirit, asking hard questions. It's important to ask hard questions, and those of us who make decisions, we have to be able to justify why we've made the decisions we've made, and we should be able to explain it to whomever's asking, right? So part of what we can do is ask those hard questions to make sure that we understand, enter into relationships with somebody that you feel is aligned with your sense, and get to work.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We'll talk a little bit about some of the specific next steps you guys can take towards the end of the evening, or end of the morning. We're not keeping you all day, I promise. But one thing that we were able to do over this last year that we have heard has been impactful is that sometimes the greatest opportunities are found in really organic moments, and creating those organic moments by bringing business people to these organizations to help them understand a little bit better. We facilitated a handful of tours of these different organizations over the last couple years with business leaders that we are willing to continue to do. We were taking folks down to Everyone Village, over to the Mission, bringing folks to the jail, the county jail, doing tours of these facilities and these entities that are serving our community, And that's where some of those moments where you're realizing, oh, wow, there's this thing that Gabe just mentioned offhand in this conversation that I actually have a tremendous amount of resources or assets I could bring. And those organic relationships are starting to form. And that, I think, is what Peter was talking about when we're talking about creating a movement. That's really how we feel like we're going to be able to do it. So the invitation's open. If you want to be involved, if you want to get to know any of these folks more, the Chamber's willing to help facilitate some of those tours and conversations, so don't hesitate to reach out. All right, round of applause for our incredible service providers. Thank you.